Good evening, class. So last week we talked a little bit about Chapter 7, Rationale and Assumptions. We did spend most of our time going over and writing for an exercise, writing the user stories where you identified the user, the function that the user is performing, and most importantly, what I wanted you to work with and try to understand is how important it is to have the business value or the rationale for tying that function to what's important to the business. Now, before we move on to Chapter 8, I do want to just hit some highlights on Chapter 7 again before we move forward. So, just going to talk a little bit about rationale and assumptions. And the whole idea of understanding the rationale is so that we are understanding the underlying purpose of the requirements and understanding the context. And here's the thing. The business pretty much knows what they want, and they are giving these sets of instructions to the developers. Now, guess what the developers are doing? They are providing the solution. So it's inevitably important for the designers to make informed decisions, not just reading the words on the paper and coming up with the best solution for what they're reading, but truly understanding and having those conversations so that they can understand the context, they can understand the business value and the rationale for what they're doing so that they can make informed decisions. And for the development team, ultimately, to deliver a successful solution. And keep in mind, and we've covered this in other chapters as well, that the customer gets to say, they own the what, and the development team owns the how. And here's really in effect what's happening when you let the customer determine the how. It is in effect telling the architect who's going to be designing the system, you're telling the architect how best to design the system. And typically this is no place for a business person on an IT project, is telling the architect how to do something. However, I will argue that there are times where the customer does get to say the how, but only when that how provides business value. So I'll give you an example. Apple Computer, they do this all the time. In fact, Steve Jobs has told their designers that he needs the inside designed as well as the outside. So when someone cracks open an iPhone, it needs to look as beautifully designed on the inside as it is on the outside. Well, that's a bit of a how, saying, well, does it really matter how we design it on the inside as long as it meets your functionality and does what the customer wants it to do? Yeah, to Steve Jobs, it was important. Also, having the minimalistic approach that Apple takes, that is clearly addressing how we deliver some of the solutions. So, but that also shows up in their business value. So even though we say the customer focuses on the what but never the how, occasionally the customer does get to focus on the how when it provides business value, and that is the absolute only time. Now, in getting to the rationale, it can be a little bit tricky because if you ask a customer, ask a stakeholder, you say, okay, tell me what you want, and the stakeholder tells you what they want. And then you ask them, why do you want this? Why is this important? They'll give you a reason. The thing is, you don't know if it's the right reason. You don't know if it's part of a bigger picture. So there is this model. I don't know what the name of it is. I think they just call it the 5 layers of why, or the 5 levels of why. I call it the power of why. And, a lot of 4-year-olds know this one. But it is, you keep asking why, and typically, they say, the proverbial typically they say that by the time you get to 5 layers of why, you have identified the root cause or the root source of what the real issue is. So I'll give you an example here in the slide. The vehicle will not start. That's the problem. So why will the vehicle not start? Well, the battery is dead. That's the first why. Why is the battery dead? Well, the alternator is not functioning. That's the second why. Well, why is the alternator not functioning? The alternator belt is broken. Why is the alternator belt broken? Well, the alternator belt was well beyond its useful service life and not replaced. Why was it not replaced? Well, the vehicle was not maintained according to the recommended service schedule. That's the fifth why, and that's the root cause. Now, occasionally, you can break that down even more. You know, why is this root cause? Is there another reason for the root cause? And in this case, we could say, well, the replacement parts are not available because of the extreme age of the vehicle. So now, you can see that if someone said my battery is dead, I need to replace the battery. Well, you go buy a new battery, and the new battery is going to last probably about 6 to 8 starts, maybe. It depends how much you drive it. If it's not getting recharged, it's not going to last for very long. So you've wasted time and money on a battery. So getting to the root source, the root cause, is what you need to focus on and where you need to try to go when you identify the rationale for the requirements. And at this level, we're really talking about the business requirements, not getting down into the nitty-gritty of the functionals and the system requirements. So if you look at the bottom of this, you've got, so really here are some solutions going through this scenario of the power of why. Start maintaining the vehicle according to the recommended service schedule, and that addresses the fifth why, or purchase a different vehicle that is maintainable. That addresses the sixth why. So just keep in mind that when you are looking for and discovering the business requirements, that you don't just settle for that first rationale that pops up. Be prepared to go deep with it and understand the root cause of why they want this. All right, so like I said, we did talk about the user story, and you guys wrote lots of user stories last week. Again, just to reiterate, we identified the user, what they want to perform, and the rationale. And here's the thing, I love user stories. They're so simple. They really revolve around the conversation. And what's very clear about a user story is it always, always, always has the rationale. Sometimes when we break apart the business requirement from the rationale, more people are focused on the function, they're focused on the what, and they're not focused on the why. They just kind of leave that out. You know, I want it because I'm the vice president and I've got the budget, therefore I should have it. But the user story doesn't allow us to do that. The user story allows us to always tie the function back to the business value. So in Chapter 7, they talked a little bit about documenting the requirements. This is also something we're going to get into later, but I do want to touch base on it. I know that you guys are getting pretty deep into your project requirements, and so we need to start talking a little bit more about format and how you tie some of these things together. And this is really identifying or addressing the traceability subject in Chapter 7. So in this case, we're going to capture some business requirements. We've talked to our stakeholders. They've given us their goals. We start translating that into business requirement speak, and we've developed some business requirements. Every requirement has an ID. So in this case, it's BR. That's common for business requirement, and then the number. So starting with BR number 1 to BR infinity. The requirement is the system shall allow a new customer to create an account. The rationale, this will allow the customer to maintain purchase history. It's owned by the sales department and it's a must-have priority. Well, you could decipher out of this easily a user story. You could say, as a new customer, I want to create an account so that I can maintain purchase history. That's a user story. That's kind of the beauty of a user story, because it ties all this stuff together automatically. So you see I've got a few here. Now the next step is going into the functional requirements. So these are the FRs. And if you notice, I've related them to the business requirements. Now, that first business requirement that we looked at was BR 137. Well, these three functional requirements tie directly all to that one business requirement. So, if you remember, the business requirement was, as a new customer, I want to be able to, well, I'm putting this in user story format, but the system shall allow a new customer to create an account. So as a part of that, again, we're breaking it down a little bit more. The system shall display on every page a link allowing the customer to create an account. Well, they can't create an account if they don't know where to go to create one. So this is the first piece of that. The next piece is, once a customer clicks the link to create an account, the system shall allow the customer to enter the following information: name, address, phone number. So again, once they know what to do, now they need to know what information is required to create the account. And we can do, now this is 25.1 because it really kind of rolls up under this one. Once a customer completes the form, the system shall check the customer's phone number to ensure the 10 digits have been entered. So it's a check supporting this one. So again, they all support BR 137. And if we had any questions about these functional requirements, we would get in touch with Terry Smith. Okay, backing up a little bit, going back to the business requirements, and all along, all through the project, it's okay to capture a risk. So yes, you will capture some risks up front, and if you remember, I think it was in chapter 6, we talked about anytime you can capture a risk, or the best time to capture a risk is anytime after the goal has been identified. And basically that's what we're trying to do here. And all throughout the project you can capture a risk, and risk will crop up even towards the end of the project. More information will become known, more risks will be identified. So here, a customer may not feel comfortable entering their credit card on the website, and as a result may leave without making a purchase. Well, that's a risk. I mean, we're not talking national security kind of stuff, but we've put all this effort into getting a customer to our website and going through our catalog and wanting to order something. They may shy, and this is really probably a few years ago. I think everybody's pretty comfortable putting their credit card on the internet. But they may shy putting their internet or their card on a website of a company that they're not real familiar with. So what are we going to do to mitigate that? Well, at the point where the customer is ready to make a payment, there should be a trust statement, something that says how, we are super secure and we do all the right things. And at the point where the customer is ready to make a payment, a sales support phone number should also be made available. So, we can't stop that customer entirely from leaving, but maybe we could address some of the reasons that they would leave and maybe convert them into a paying customer. So again, there's more risks down here that we can identify, and identify if it's a risk that has a high probability of happening or medium or low, and then identify a mitigation strategy. All right, so the traceability, once we put it all together, we've got the business requirement. The system shall, well, let's go to this one, next one, number 138. The system shall support the following payment methods. All these down here. This is standard for the industry in order for us to be competitive. That's our rationale. There is a risk, though, and we just talked about that risk. So now we've got the traceability here. Also, when we talked about the functional requirements, we had the traceability back to the business requirements. Now, you might start seeing something here that could become a problem soon, and that is if I've got 50 business requirements and 600 functional requirements and 23 risks, how do I track it all? How do I mean, are we talking about a ginormous spreadsheet? How do we manage all of this? Well, there are some people who manage it all on a spreadsheet, and it keeps a person very busy. There are also programs out there that do it all for you. Certainly, if you could take for example, looking at this traceability chart in front of us, this BR138, if I could click on RSK1, risk 1, and link over to that, and then link back and link all over where all these links go to, that'd be a good thing to have. It'd be very helpful. Everything would be linked together. Well, there are systems that do that. IBM has a system called Rational Doors, which does that very well. It's very, very heavy. You would not use it on a small project. It is, takes a lot of training, a lot of skill in learning how to use that. All right, and always, I think though, the one thing every single chapter pretty much has in common is validating. So once you discover information, you need to bring it back to your stakeholders to validate it. For the assumptions and the rationale, it's best to do that in a workshop format, as with many validations. Always be prepared to change these things on the fly. And always be prepared to capture new requirements, because closing or bringing the information back and looping it back to the stakeholders will cause them to think about new things, and don't be surprised when new requirements show up. All right, tonight we'll be talking about definitions. This may very well be the shortest chapter in the book, so it will probably go fairly quickly. All right, when we talk about definitions, we are talking about domain language, meaning the language of the domain, the greater ecosphere that the project is taking place in. We're talking about role identification and data definition. So when we talk about domain language, first of all, we're looking at the language of the culture of the organization, the culture of the business. So if you don't understand the way that the stakeholders, and this is really where you're going to see it, the stakeholders are going to be talking a certain language, and if you don't understand that language, you're not going to understand the concepts that they're explaining, and you're not going to know what questions to ask, because you're hearing the words, but you're not really understanding how they are related, and you're not understanding how what kind of emphasis those words have on, especially on this project. So you've probably all have an experience where you've talked to someone and they're speaking English or they're speaking your native tongue, but you're not really grasping what they said. So I've got a video for you to watch. I want you to just take a quick look at this and see if you can really understand what she's talking about.
The Omnitrol Smart Infrastructure focuses on rapidly deploying operational visibility solutions that dramatically improve operational performance, increase efficiency, and reduce waste. With an Omnitrol Business Intelligent Network, you not only achieve total visibility across your internal operations, but also enable a powerful, secure, and scalable global track and trace infrastructure. Omnitrol Networks is working with industry-leading corporations to deliver the industry's most versatile, standards-based, real-time, integrated global operations. Are you ready to Omnitrolize your infrastructure? We welcome you to see our award-winning Omnitrol in action, and we will gladly discuss and review your business requirements, or if you prefer, give you a live demonstration of Omnitrol Smart Infrastructure. Come and see for yourself how we can make your shop floor talk.
All right, so did you capture that? The the girl was talking about something technologically, at a high level. She said threw a lot of words out there, but I think probably most of us come back and say, what was she talking about? I really didn't get it. I heard something about infrastructure, and I'm not quite sure what she was talking about. Well, if you were closer to that business, if you were inside that business as a stakeholder, those things, that language might be more meaningful to you. So you need to understand the language of the culture, and like I said, this is mostly spoken by the stakeholders in order for you to proceed and be successful in leading this, or not leading the project necessarily, but leading in the discovery of the requirements. Then there is the language of the project, and this is probably really going to be spoken more by the people who are closer to the project. You're going to hear a lot of nomenclature about specifics on the project, and some of this will actually develop as the project is rolling along, and you need to make sure, just like language of the larger picture, language of the culture, you need to make sure you understand the language of the project. And then finally, there is the language of the product, and this is going to be IT speak. You'll hear things like SOA architecture, or in hibernate, or PM, and these things you need to, again, understand them so that you can understand how things relate and understand what kind of impact they have on the requirements and ultimately on the system. The next thing we want to talk about is role identification, and the users of the systems need to be defined so that architects, designers, developers, and testers can understand the context of the user's job. So this is all a part. It's not just enough to say the system shall do this, the system shall do that. We need to understand who the users are and how they're going to be using it, because that completes the picture, that completes the context of understanding how this system is going to be used, where it's going to be used, and what influences it will have and what things will influence it. The defining roles can aid in discovering requirements. So a real life story, when I was with AT&T and we were building these point of sale systems, we identified that one of the roles was the sales associate, and they had certain functionality that they could do in the point of sale system. Then there was the sales manager. They had all the sales functionality of the sales associate, but they had additional functionality, closing out the drawers, counting the money, approving inventory counts, approving variances, these kinds of things. And we got through that, felt pretty comfortable, but then we realized in some of the larger stores they had an assistant manager. So the assistant manager, we found out, had all the roles, all the functionality of a sales associate, but not necessarily a duplicate of the sales manager. So by defining these roles, we identified that there were some additional requirements. And then lastly, depicting the role relationships can aid in capturing the workflow. So going back to our scenario with the retail stores, again, it wasn't enough to capture what a salesperson can do and capture what a sales manager can do, but oftentimes there were interactions between the sales associate and the sales manager, and we needed to capture those interactions in the systems. For example, it was approving an override maybe. So it was a sales associate went through a process with a customer, something became an exception, and they had to bring the sales manager in to approve that exception. So this actually became a workflow that we had to capture, and by understanding the relationships, or understanding first the roles and then understanding the relationships between those roles, it helped us to identify the workflow. As the business analyst, it will be your job to pull together the project dictionary. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're responsible for all the content in it, but it is your job to pull together the information so that it can be found in one place, and also to be asking the questions and identifying if this is something that should be in the project dictionary. Now, there's not a whole lot of rules to the project dictionary, but basically, if it's a term or a definition that probably needs a common understanding among everybody, it's a good idea to put it into the project dictionary. So the next question is, where will you discover this information that's in the project dictionary? Well, you're going to find it everywhere. You'll find it in your workshops with your stakeholders. You'll find it in the interviews, find it in the documentation, and in the industry publications. So one thing that's very helpful is having a business analyst come in from the outside as a consultant who understands the role of being a business analyst but doesn't necessarily understand the domain. Now, some may argue on that because they would say, well, if a business analyst can bring in domain expertise, it makes the project, or that person can be more effective in the project, and I also agree with that. But bringing someone in who is more objective is because they're more objective. They don't have the domain experience and the cultural experience. They're going to be more inclined to ask questions and draw out clarifications. And again, if we're preparing a documentation that others behind us will be reading, then it's a good idea to make sure you've got all your bases covered. And sometimes we take things for granted once we're already in the culture and in the domain. So now let's get to the data definition, which is also known as the data dictionary. The data dictionary, this is really where we are defining the data, what the data looks like. And if you remember the 5-component framework, you've got the people and procedures on one side, you've got hardware and software on the other side, and the data is the connection in between. The data is what the people and the processes and the software and the hardware are all about. It's all about moving the data around, moving the information around. Back in the 90s, they were talking about the rise of the information worker. Well, the information worker works with, in its rawest form, the information worker works with data, and this is found in the data dictionary. So the data that we're talking about is formatted data, and it's in every project. Now, the reason I say formatted data is because I'm just trying to make sure you understand that all data within a system is formatted data. So even if it's data that just allows you to freeform write, that in itself is a format clarification. That is a description of how the data is to be presented, and it can be very finite as well. We're also talking about, so in the formatted data, we're talking about transactions. Transactions can be from a point of sale system, for example. Transactions could be when you sign up to receive an email or sign up to receive something online. That is transactional data. The transaction is you are giving your email in exchange for something, for a newsletter or what have you. In addition to that, transaction data being your email, the date and the time, that is also captured. That is also transactional data. Databases also. Now, everything goes into a database, but then also things are pulled out of the database for use later on. we put information into a database for an online catalog. Well, that now becomes, when you go in and you're shopping online, you're accessing the data that's in the database. Also communication. Even if you are on an online system and you're chatting, the words that you are typing in and also reading when the chat comes back, that is also formatted data. Now, bad formatting creates a lot of problems, and I don't mean to say that formatting data is a little problem. I mean, it is a major problem. It is very likely some of the most significant problems that you can have, and simple formatting issues can cause this. It can cause crashing. It can cause legal liability. It can cause ultimately loss of business. So having the data right, and it's not like it has to be right 99.9% of the time. It has to be right 100% of the time. That is really the goal, and there should be, rightfully so, there should be very little toleration for this. The data dictionary defines the attributes of the data. So we're talking about the characteristics of the data. That's what the data dictionary defines. And when we talk about, if you've heard the term metadata, well, metadata means data about data. And that's really what we're talking about in the data dictionary. It's defining the metadata, because the metadata defines the data. Hope that makes sense. All right, so this is a actually, this is a database, more of a database schema type layout, but it has a lot of the elements that is used to define data. So if you look in the first column here, you see the table name. So these, there's 9 tables here. These are the attributes. So if each one of these tables were an Excel spreadsheet, the attribute names, these would be the headers across the top of each column: company name, supplier name, purchase date, and so on and so forth. Then this tells about the content. Basically this is just to help somebody understand what is in this particular column. And you might say, well, it's pretty obvious when you see company name, but sometimes it's not always obvious. Then this goes into the next one here, type, talks about what kind of character is it. Is it a date, for example here? Is it a number? Is it a character? There's lots of other types of data you can have. And then they provide a format, so that this is the format that they want to see it in. For example, date, they want to see 2 digits for date with a dash, 2 digits for month with a dash, and then 2 digits for year. And then what the allowable ranges are, and then if it's required or not. And if you've been to, actually should have studied this in 2010, the primary key or foreign key, and then just a reference. So what I want to talk about now is give you an example of a project that I worked on in Denver, Colorado a couple years ago. It was a reverse logistics project for Cricket Communications, and I was out there for a little over a year. And the project was onboarding new repair vendors. Now, Cricket Communications is a wireless provider, just like AT&T and Sprint and Verizon. Cricket is really more on the West Coast, basically I think from Kansas over to the west. There are some here, but they're really in the prepaid space. And this project, they had repair vendors that they had decided it was time to do business with somebody else, so they were bringing on 3 new repair vendors. And if you can imagine, your phone breaks, you take it back to the store, and they say, well, it's under warranty, we'll fix it. So you leave your phone, they give you a loaner phone. That phone goes back to the repair vendor and comes back, and they call you up and say your phone's ready, you come back and pick it up. Pretty simple process, but if you can imagine that a company, and Cricket is a small company, they average about 12,000 phones a month that come back that have to be, and this represents about 2%, that come back that have to go through this repair process. Well, if you can imagine 12,000 phones a month, it's very, very easy for a handset, for your phone to get lost. So all of this information, or your phone going back into a repair vendor, has to be tracked. It has multiple stops. It has a staging area. Then it has multiple docks that it sits on. It gets packed up multiple times, and then it finally shows up at a repair facility to get repaired. And then all the sections, all the steps that it goes through, all the cost of the material to fix it, even though you may not be paying for it, the manufacturer is paying for it, or in this case, Cricket may have been paying for it, and all those costs of repair have to be tracked and captured and totaled and ultimately paid for. So that's what this project was all about. It was bringing on 3 new repair vendors. One of them was Samsung, very big. We spent some time with them down in their Dallas, Texas repair facility. We also worked with a repair vendor up in Indianapolis, a third-party small organization, and another small one up in Detroit. So very unique situations. Each one had their own requirements for what they can provide as far as information and what information they need. So it was a lot of a conversation defining, everybody stating their needs, and then ultimately creating a file specification. So basically the description of this project was establishing a data file feed for tracking the handsets while in repair at manufacturer's depot or third-party repair facilities. Now, I'm going to show you some documents. These were the real documents that I put together, and now these are not necessarily project requirements, because the project in itself was putting together the data file. However, I mean, the entire documentation was all about the data dictionary and all about formatting the data and defining it so that it would be useful as it transacts between multiple companies. Okay, these 2 documents that we're going to look at, like I said, these were put together for that actually we put together as Cricket to give to the repair vendors. And this one repair vendor, they said, this is what we do for a living. We've already have a process that we need you to tie into us. And we use this format called EDI 856 or generic ASN. So basically, they said, here's how we need information, and if you can just send it to us this way, then we can help you with what you need. So they actually gave this information to us so that we could send it, send the files to them. And as far as the data definition goes, the first part of this data feed was the header layout. You had the record type, which was hard-coded for header. Then we had the purchase order, and that was character with up to 10 digits, and basically, and all of these are required, basically that was the purchase order number of the shipment. Pallet ID, character of 20 characters long, up to, that is, not exactly. Carton ID, item code, and carton quantity, which is an integer. So where these others under character could be numbers, this as an integer is something that you can tally. You cannot tally a character in these files. You can tally numbers and you can tally integers. An integer and a number are going to be the same thing. However, an integer specifically says that it's going to be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, a 20, and it's not going to have any decimals involved. Then we move down to the detail layout, and this is really the content of the feed, what record type, the pallet ID, and this is going to be for basically for each phone. And there is a serial number, and phones can have multiple, I've seen up to 3 serial numbers and special codes that go with them. So all the data is defined And this, I'm skipping through this one. The other document we're going to look at has a lot more information in it. I want to spend more time on that. So what this looks like is when the data comes across, it looks exactly like this. Now, you look at this and you may say, wow, that's messed up. I hope I don't ever have to read one of these. No one ever reads the data like this. You basically dump it into either a reader, or you dump it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then it takes the form of a table with columns and rows, and you can tally up things, and it makes a lot more sense. So this was a very simple data format, and again, I don't think you're going to see a lot of this necessarily in your project, but it is possible, and I am kind of going out to the extreme so that you can see to what degree some of this happens. All right, the next file was where we were. We had hired people to kind of build on their or to build their repair process, and we were a big client for them. And we told them, here's the information that we need back from you. And so it was there are two programs, the handset warranty exchange and the repair vendor invoicing. And you see who the author was. So this is a lot more like a requirements document. Now this is not a project like what you guys would actually build, but this in itself was a project, and we had to put together a requirements document for this. You got the table of contents there, an overview of the project. The Cricut contacts, so you see me there. Also, this is a bit of a project dictionary, just by putting the contacts in there, and some of the information about the project. Even though in this specific document we did not create a project dictionary, just really wasn't appropriate for this level of work. All right, so yeah, there's a lot of definition or a lot of other items in here. I'm not going to get into them all, but I want to get into more of the content of the data. So like the other project, like the other document, we had a header file, and then we had a detailed file. And you can see the file type is a string, and it is either daily file HWE or monthly file INV. It could be either one. Couldn't be both. Couldn't be anything else. It could just be either this one or this one. So the special codes that we're using. Let's get on down to the detail file. There's a lot more information in here. So again, all the detail that we're looking for on each one of the phones, each row is defined by this entire table that we're looking at here. You've got the file date, the work order number. This could be a string. Now a string and a character, you saw in the other file we use CHAR. Well, that would be the same as, I think it's varchar, VAR, variable char, CHAR, variable character, varchar. You've got number, which would be the same as in the other one we saw as integer. And you see we've got a customer number, which in this case the customer was Cricut, the serial in and the serial out. So we're sending a phone in, and it may be, if we're doing a handset exchange, we're looking for a serial number coming out. There's a warranty flag, and we're able to identify, if this phone is under warranty, and able to give some descriptions for the data that is in each one of these rows. There's a triage status. Now there is a table we're going to look at below that says what the triage status is. So that triage status is when the phone comes in, it goes through a process where they say, here's what's wrong with the phone, and based on what's wrong with the phone determines where it goes after the triage station. So that triage status is captured there. Fault codes are captured as it goes through the line. Basically they scan the serial number, and then they have these charts with barcodes on them. If when they find out that this phone was dropped in water, they scan the serial number and then they scan the water code, and that becomes a fault code that ends up on this file. There's certain repair level, and you see we've identified repair levels here. Level 1 is cosmetic. Level 2 is repair, no solder, repair with solder. So what we're looking for is, the word level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And so you see cosmetic parts, whatever that part is, we want to see it on the report you send back to us. We want to know the labor cost for working on this one specific phone so that we can tally up all the phones and either send it as a bill to the manufacturer or send it as a check to the repair vendor. So you kind of get the idea that we use these data dictionaries to define the data between these two organizations. And you can imagine if there is a fault here, if there's a format variation, it could really mess things up. So look at the file here. So these are what these files look like, and this is actually a real sample file that I just did a screenshot on and put it in here. So you can tell, very difficult to read if you had to actually read it, but you drop this into an Excel spreadsheet, or you drop it into a specified reader that's been created for these files, then it starts to make sense, and you can search these and do some very quick analysis on the data that you're pulling back. So I went through this exercise to show you what this idea of a data dictionary, what it's all about. I don't think you have to provide a data dictionary for your project. It's not really somewhere we need to go given the newness of the information for this course. But you do need to understand that you may run into, if this is a line of work that you're going into, you may run into opportunities where you have to define the data that's going to be transacted between systems or between companies. And this is the kind of work that you'll get into. All right, so that is it for Chapter 8, and we will see you after the break.